I'm Rob.
And I'm Dave.
We've got the same dad.
Well, we didn't meet until I was 30.
So this is the podcast where
We've been making up for lost time by sharing albums that
your
brother
should.
No.
Today, however, we're not just discussing one album because, frankly, I think it would be impossible to find a single hour that sums up the music of Frank Zappa.
Oh, yes.
Moreover, we're breaking with our whole central conceit because in this case, it's not even an artist that neither of us know. I think both of us know a fair bit about Frank Zappa, but it's safe to say my brother Dave knows a lot more about Frank Zappa than me.
Well, we'll find out.
So I walk into this podcast with a problem. I've been listening to Zappa on and off for probably more than 20 years.
Uh-huh.
And I'm still not really sure about him. It's not even that I'm not sure if I like him, if I enjoy his music. I'm not really sure if he deserves the hype.
Wow.
I'm just completely still quite befuddled by his existence and his impenetrable allure, which I know you spend quite a lot of time with for me.
Yes.
So,
and indeed, probably I was as well when I embarked on the re-release journey, because in 2012, he re-released, or its estate re-released everything, nicely numbered, sort of 1 to a gazillion, because there are about a gazillion albums. So I started doing it. I'm going to listen to number 1 and get all the way through. And of course, it'll come as no surprise. Sorry, real Zappa fans. I got to about number 40, I think, sort of late 80s, and then life got in the way. But I have listened to every Zappa album in that chronological order a few times.
So that would take us, from the mid-60s, 66 was his first album, up until...
Yeah, up to roughly 1984. I think Thing Fish, probably. I'm probably the only one. Thing Fish probably did it for me.
Thing Fish broke you.
Broke me.
Well, I'll lay my cards on the table. As I say, I'm no way a Zappa expert, but have been flirting. And looking through his discography just now, I think it's safe to say that I probably owned and or played at least a few times about 15 Zappa albums I'm familiar with, which for any other artist would be enough to have, a pretty bird's eye view of their entire artistic makeup, their journey, their art, whatever they're up to. With Zappa, who I think famously has over 60 studio albums, 62. And then they fired out another 67, since he died. So, in that sense, I've heard less than a quarter of probably the work that he released in his lifetime, that he put his rubber stamp on, and barely a tenth of what exists out there today.
Yeah.
So that's why I come to you. But I think the first big question then is, why should anyone give a monkeys about this obviously quite incredible, but also quite inscrutable and befuddling character?
Because he is brilliant. I think that's number 1. I mean, he is an amazing. Well, so there's the question there, because he is. Well rehearsed. That he is an incredible composer and writer of songs and classical music. He is an incredible guitarist, and we can talk about the guitaring and people will go, well, you're the greatest guitarist of all time. No, but he is often in conversations about the top 20. He has forays into jazz. So King Kong is on that famous American book of American jazz. So he's a rock musician that's in that. But there's all of that. And I suppose one of the challenges is you go, well, he does all of those things. Does he do all of them well? And we talked before about, look, there's a difference between, like, when rock music improvises, it does it, but it's never going to be jazz, right? It's always more simplistic. But I think Frank Zappa, for me, because I at heart, what I choose to listen to mostly is rock music, he pushes the envelope of rock music into lots of different directions. And you can argue, well, if you're going to listen to Frank Zappa's sort of jazz efforts, you might well listen to jazz, or if you're going to listen to his classical efforts, you might listen to classical. But I think as a whole, I struggle to find, if I want to find music that's emotional, I probably don't pick Frank Zappa off the shelf. But if I want to find music that I find the most interesting, even though I've listened to it before a lot, then Frank Zappa is where I go, because it is the most interesting music for me. And that's without caveat. Look, I know it's not jazz, I know it's not classical, but in the rock oeuvre, it's the most interesting music I've heard still.
Fair enough. It's definitely the most music. It's definitely the most the most ist.
Do you know what it is? It's the most frank music. It's the most Frank Zappa, and that's because another thing about him is he did kind of just, there's a genre that is Frank Zappa. You know, like he's defined his own world.
So that's exactly what we're discussing, and the question therefore is this world one that I and our listeners want to inhabit? As you say, Zappa does so many different things. Mm-hmm. How well he does them we can come to later. But for me, and for any beginner, it's really troubling to know where to start. How do you divide his oeuvre up? How do you approach it, and where should someone begin?
And it is difficult. And he himself would hate this conversation, because even like his first album, Freak Out, had pretty much, you know, all the roots of everything were on that almost, which is quite remarkable. And he never saw the joy between it. You know, he found all of his musical expression equally valid and not to be cocked up. But you can do it, kinda, I think. Others will have a different opinion. There's definitely the 60s kind of classic stuff. The first three albums, Freak Out, absolutely free running, you know, for the money, and Lumpy Gravy, which is very different. But if he'd just done those three, he'd still be like an icon.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Those albums are all credited to him and the Mother's Invention, though, right? So I understood this was him leading a band, and maybe the band were actually, the fact they've been credited, I presume they're bringing something to the table. No. It wasn't a case of him, you know, being in Wings and then going solo, which is how I understood it.
Yeah, no. I mean, he picked them out and said, "I'll make you rich and famous, but I'm in control. You will not, you know, I'm writing everything, I'm producing everything, I'm arranging everything. Everything was him." And really, I mean, you know, he moved on from that set of people and didn't call them the Mother's Invention anymore, because he found them too limited. You know, some of them were very good musicians, but the musicians he went on to work with in the 70s and 80s were clearly much better musicians, technically and in every way.
But there is some sense of continuity between those few records, and presumably they're all recorded with the same set of musicians at least. So
yeah. So the Mother's Invention were broadly the same people in the Mother's band, but it was very much him needing some builders to build his house that he designed. They were just bricklaying.
Do you have any idea why he chose to form a band and credit a band in that case? And also, what led to him dissolving that collection of musicians and rebranding as a solo artist?
He definitely wanted to move on from that set of musicians, and I guess not be limited by just them. And so on his solo work from then on, he was always bringing in, you know, different people all the time. But and the Frank Zappa band would evolve all the time throughout the 70s and 80s with different people coming out of it.
So what was the first record credited just to him?
That would be Hot Rats.
Which does feel like a real redefinition of him and an artist in his scope, which is why I understood he was in a band and then got loose.
But don't run away with any thought that the band were in any sense a collective band of, I mean, like literally, I think I saw a documentary of Jimmy Carl Black, the main drummer in the Mother's Invention, to literally being told by Zappa, this is what I want, and Zappa was doing it, you know, and then Jimmy Carl Black would do it. He was probably a better drummer than he was, probably a better bassist than the bassist, but you know, he was just it for everything, and he just needed people to play. He didn't need anybody to, you know, go, oh wow, I love that chord progression, I'll do a solo around it, or I've got this idea. Nah, it was all his vision always.
Interesting. Well, to be honest, from what I've heard of those early records, and I think there's some that I probably did pick up but not play extensively, because honestly, and I might feel differently today, but I found them a little bit silly, a little bit dated. There's a lot of parody, particularly running for the money, what parodying the 60s scene. I guess Freak Out was parodying what the 60s scene, drugs and whatnot, and it didn't immediately chime with me, and I didn't find it as musically arresting as some of the later Zappa I heard. So honestly, I've struggled with those early records. What happened next?
Well, so what happened next is he did Hot Rats, released a couple of retrospectives of the Mothers, Winnie Sandwich, Weasel Rip My Flesh, which is some good stuff on.
Oh, so those are both Mothers albums?
Yeah, but they're not. They were released after Hot Rats, but they were just stuff that he had I mean, he was always doing that anyway, like recordings and tapes and bringing stuff together and shoving it together.
That's interesting because I actually own those two albums, perhaps because they're easy to pick up on second-hand vinyl. I've got to ask just for myself, are they weaker, therefore, than the kind of first trio of classic Mothers albums?
I don't think so. No, and I think there was such a library of stuff that he was making and produce that I don't think. Well, I suppose. I mean,
because there was definitely an overarching narrative uniting We're In It for the Money, and I guess maybe Absolutely Free and Freak Out.
Yeah.
Whereas the other two feel a bit more.
No, that's probably true. So Freak Out is a big old concept album, double, of everything he ever wanted to do. It was his first one. He shoved everything on it. Absolutely Free does. Yeah, I suppose they have a little bit more of a conceptual. And certainly Lumpy Gravy, which is just this, mad cut montage of people talking, classical music, bit of other songs in there. That was very much a collage creation.
Anyway. Okay. I've heard a bit of those records, and then I've definitely heard a lot of the early 70s, probably because I'm quite into jazz, so I have heard this trio of instrumental albums he did. Obviously Hot Rats is a classic, so that's probably the first Zappa album I've ever heard.
Right.
And Wacka Jawacka and Grand Wazoo are ones I was drawn to because I'd read that they were kind of bold, conceptual, kind of instrumental jazzy records. To me, they feel very different to the 60s era. As well as breaking with the Mothers musically, he'd obviously stopped singing, basically, and gone in this instrumental direction. Any idea what prompted that and how these records held up?
Okay, so what happened? I mean, he'd done Hot Rats, but he was he created the Flow and Eddie, the brief Flow and Eddie Mothers of invention. So you know about the Flow and Eddie?
No, who are
okay?
They sound like boxers, or maybe early rappers.
So Mark Volman and Howard Kalin. They were in the Turtles. Do you remember the Turtles?
I assume they're like an early pop band, a bit like the Hollies or something.
I can't on my love.
Okay,
that big hit. Yeah.
That seems really obscure to me because I know Zappa liked a little bit of doo-wop, but the whole point of the 60s music he made, I thought, was mocking that kind of classic pop era. So how did he end up playing with some of its architects?
I don't know. And there's a question there about, when he did in that period, he did Cruising with Reuben and the Jets. Of course. That was one of the very later initial period Mothers albums, and that was basically a doo-wop album.
Really?
Yeah.
Was there any earnestness to it?
Well, and that, you see,
because this is something I struggle with Zappa. I think lots of people do.
Yeah.
Because he's perpetually...
Are you ever serious?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think at some point, maybe he uses it a little bit as a mask.
Yeah.
That he might actually like a lot of his own musical ideas, but because he's presenting them as parody the whole time, it kind of gives him a layer of protection that if he does anything a little bit simple, a little bit poppy, a little bit potentially trite,
he has to...
He's dressed it up as irony.
I agree. No, and I think and Cruising with the Jets is a great example of that. The whole album, you go, are you really doing this, or are you piss taking doing this, or are you, or both? And ultimately that question of like, should you be into Zappa or not? You just have to take that off and just enjoy it as it is.
My understanding though was that at least the early stuff, at least Freak Out, was kind of earnest in its anti-war, anti-60s, anti-drug kind of stance. Did he develop that mask later?
Yeah, I think a lot happened. Obviously in the kind of late 60s, early 70s for it. Because certainly We're In It for the Money. There's bits that felt really heartfelt, and since those 60s, nothing other than the really towards the end, actually, when he brought it the hard way when he was dying of cancer, there feels like there's a bit of real emotion there. Everything in the middle, it is
the 20 years when he made
the 20 in the middle.
records.
Yeah. It is hard, as I say. I don't listen to it for kind of it's grabbing my soul here. It's more of a interest and intellectual thing. And he definitely seemed to back away from anything that sounded well. And then there's Watermelon Lisa Hay, which clearly has a very heart tugging idea behind it. Yeah, but there it is. There's Evening Roy. When was Frank Zappa ever serious about anything? he certainly sounded and felt more serious in the 60s, I guess. Like, it felt like he wasn't one step removed from what he was doing, if that makes sense. So Flo and Eddie, I don't know how he found them, and it was basically, he went from doing Hot Rats and all of this brilliant stuff to, it was a bit vaudeville. So there's the album, Humour, June 1971, which is basically a knockabout comedy routine. Smutty, takes the mickey out of lots of other rock bands, and the production's not great, and it actually doesn't sound like it's not one of his best musical bands, I don't think. But yeah, he just did a kind of knockabout vaudeville album with them. They've got very high-pitched voices. They did a lot of kind of talking routines and things. That's all on there. Puts a lot of people off. It's very puerile. So for a lot of people, the Flo and Eddie thing is not a highlight.
I have to say that does sound horrible.
Yeah, there you go. But during that time when he was touring with them, he got attacked on stage in
By a fan?
By
someone that objected to his pure nonsense, someone that actually had a stand to make, or just a crazed Lennon-esque superfan?
History doesn't relate why somebody pushed him off the stage, but basically a fan, well, no, probably not the biggest fan move, jumped on the stage and pushed him off. He fell 12 feet into the orchestra pit. And it wasn't funny. He broke his leg, thought he broke his neck, it was a proper suffering. One arm was paralyzed.
I've always felt that Zappa holds his audience in a certain amount of disdain. And I can certainly understand why you develop that kind of complex if you had that kind of tragic event early in your career.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very true. Anyway, because of that, he obviously wasn't touring, couldn't play, so that's why Waka Jacka and Grand Wazoo came about.
I see.
So he wrote them, and produced them and just went down that kind of world instead.
Okay, Dave, so I think we've already found three distinct phases. We've got the early kind of 60s Mother stuff, we've got a couple of albums with this Flo and Eddie chaps.
Yeah. And
then we've got these kind of two grandiose instrumental albums which link in a sense to Hot Rats.
Mm-hmm.
What happens next?
What happens next is he then forms another Mother of Invention, and this is kind of the 70 to 75 other classic period, if you like. So there's a string of albums where some of them were live recordings released to studio. There's a kind of, he's never had this kind of, this is my live album and this is my studio album thing. He's always just box and cots between the two and shove things together as he wants to. But there's a set of albums that I love, probably for me, maybe one of the core of the works, which are Apostrophe, Roxy and Elsewhere, One Size Fits All, Bongo Fury, which was with Captain Beefheart, and
Overnight Sensation.
Did I mention that? I think I did. Overnight Sensation. And
I will say now, those are the four that I definitely own and probably have played the most.
Yeah. And how would you describe them? They're kind of interesting.
Would it be fair to say they are quote unquote strictly commercial?
Well, maybe for its time. And there's always the question about how much, especially in the later works, how much you're doing this because you want to sell some records.
Overnight Sensation definitely feels to me like he's aware of his gifts, but he's kind of deliberately employing them to a certain end.
Yeah.
Knowing what other mania he is capable of.
Sure.
But I don't know how much that was calculated.
Yeah. Exactly.
Does that make me a little bit facile? Does that make me like a kind of bad Zappa fan if I've gravitated towards this quartet of records, which I didn't realise, but it seems like now you put them like that. I hadn't lumped them together, but probably are the four I like the most and have gone back to the most.
Yeah, no,
gone back to it all.
Yeah. No, I think there's. Well, I mean, there's probably, we'll come on to the later 70s and early 80s stuff where I'm sure there are a body of people for whom that represents Zappa. But yeah, I'd say there's quite a lot of people who those 4 or 5 albums are kind of the core of their Zappa collection that they go back to time and time again.
I'll also add that I never realised that they were, the same band.
Well, there was I mean, you'd have to get a spreadsheet out. There was some evolution in those bands, but there were some common themes. I mean, there was people like Ian Underwood, Ruth, and George Duke. He had a relationship with Jean-Luc Ponty on the violin.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So
it's a major fusion of players with their own solo careers that were
exactly
selling significant records
Yeah.
independently, and they were. So that in that case, Zappa must have been quite commercially successful to be able to employ these kind of talents. Was this when you were selling a lot of records? Did this?
Yeah. So Overnight Sensation and Apostrophe went gold in the US.
Okay, but only gold.
Only gold. But if you look at they're the only two that were anywhere near any of that in the US. Zoota Laws, which we come on to, went silver in the UK.
Okay, so after he's had these two gold smashes,
smash hits,
rather than doubling down with another big kind of rock comedy funk fun album thing. I think he did something completely different because I don't really know what happened next.
Okay, so he did that collection of stuff. There was then label problems.
Okay.
The curse of the 70s, label problems. Was there a band in the 70s that didn't fall out with their label or their manager or something? So we had a massive falling out and suing between Zappa and his manager, Herb Cohen. As a result, there is one Zappa album that's on Warner Brothers.
Oh.
That is Zoota Laws.
Okay.
Have you heard Zoota Laws?
No.
It's really good and kind of almost serves for me as a bridge between the kind of quite thick sounding stuff in the early 70s, not thick as in stupid, just kind of like very lots going on, dense stuff. And then you kind of move on to the sound, if you like, of the later 70s, which was lighter and airier and doesn't have that same kind of almost vinyl feel to it, if that makes any sense at all. But it does feel like it stands alone a bit, Zoota Laws. But definitely worth checking out. Because then what happened, and we could spend the entire podcast, probably an hour, going into the intricate problems and legal issues around Zappa, Herb Cohen, Discreet Records, the label, and Warner Brothers, the label, and quite what happened. But if you really want to, Google it, there was a huge label mess up. Zappa ended up hating Warner Brothers and quotes that quite a lot in the late 70s about how much he hates Warner Brothers. And the basic outcome of, at one stage, Zappa produced 4 albums because after Zoota Laws, he was required to by Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers were kind of expecting them one at a time. And being Zappa, he just went, here's your 4, give me your money and release them. And they didn't. And hence more rowing went on. And they were eventually released as 4 separate albums, which were Zappa in New York, Studio Tam, Sleep Dirt, and Orchestral Favourites. Okay. And then a long time after that, Zappa kind of took those and turned them into a 4-album set called Lava. And I have to say, you can buy them all individually, but you're missing out a couple of things. But Lava as a set, and I think he was right, when he reordered it into Lava as a set, it's really great. And for me, it's a great big lump of work that I really enjoy. And if you listen to the 4 albums individually, you kind of go, yeah, there's too much of one thing. But they're kind of splicing up of it all because there's some live comedy stuff on it, there's some really good tunes on it, there's some orchestral stuff on it, there's all kinds of different things.
So essentially you've got a live album.
Yeah.
And you've got, 2 kind of rock albums? Studio Tam.
Yeah.
Sleep Dirt.
Yeah.
And then I'm most interested by this Orchestral Favourites.
Okay.
Which is obviously a whole of a subgenre of Zappa work. Was this the first time he tried his hand at contemporary composition?
Oh, golly, no. I mean, he'd been doing it all the way along, and he had vaults of it written, and he'd managed to get bits of it released on and recorded on certain albums.
With symphony orchestras?
Yeah. But the problem is, of course, that symphony orchestras are incredibly expensive. But yeah, as far as I know, it's the I think it is maybe the first time he's kind of paid for the orchestra to do, and it's a stand together album, Orchestral Favourites. But then he put them together in Lava.
So then he's free from Warner Brothers. So he actually did 5 albums for Warner Brothers, not 1.
Well, no, because the only one that Warner Brothers never released them. They were released. They were released back on, I think, discrete labels. Right. Yeah. Distributed by Warner Brothers.
In any case,
yeah,
he dropped these 4 albums dropped.
Yeah.
In close succession.
Yeah.
Then what?
Then we get what you could call another proper period. which is your kind of, I guess, what most people know of Zappa. It's your Joe's Garage, your Shake Your Booty, and You Are What You Is. Those kind of big, well, triple album in terms of Joe's Garage, but double albums in terms of the other two. Where it did feel like his humour was, this is where you've got things like, Baby Snakes came later, but a lot of it was pulled from that period as well. But this is where you've got tracks like
Titties and Beer.
This is where you got things like Titties and Beer, I Have Been in You, and kind of Jewish Princess, that kind of thing.
Ooh, that's not aged well.
Yeah, no, and he certainly became very big in kind of American college rock kind of boy world.
Which is probably the last thing he aspired to with his classical retentions.
Well, I think he was quite happy to take the money, and that's the thing about how much was he playing to it or not. But nonetheless, I think, another place to start would be those, Shake Booty, You Are What You Is, to me have always been, two great double albums with a lot of really good stuff on them. And Joe's Garage, one is really, really good. As 2 and 3 go on a little bit, but they're also really good. But that's definitely a kind of another period.
Yeah, I've spent time with all of those releases, and I've got to say, as a puerile teenager, I giggled at Joe's Garage. Ironically, I hoped.
Yeah.
But there's no way that I'd revisit that as an adult or take it seriously as a work of art, because it's just kind of pointless, puerile nonsense, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but I could, yes, although I could make it like with all of them, there's a flow to the music that's above and beyond the puerile nonsense, and it's fun. It's quite complex in places. I quite like it. I mean, even on Shake Your Booty, there's things like Rats May Go, which is just this improvisation thing. So it's not just out and out commercialism.
I don't think it's commercialism. I think it's shock value. It's, especially at that point, doing an album about sucking cock in 1981 or whatever, pre-Tipper Gore, was probably pretty damn outrageous, sure. Yeah, and that was put him in the limelight, but it seems a little bit cheap to me. But
yeah, fair enough. So that all happened, and of course the other thing is the guitarist in him. Because he was always known as a guitarist on his records, etc., and he really focused or shed a light on that with Shut Up and Play Your Guitar, Shut Up and Play Your Guitar Some More, and Return of the Son of Shut Up and Play Your Guitar, where they're all just his guitar improvisations, if you like, taken from lots and lots and lots of live shows.
Lots of widdly guitar, as you like to say.
Yeah.
Anything else significant happen?
And then there's the 80s. And to be honest, it's really hard to make sense of the 80s because there's a lot going on. There's some classical stuff, London Symphony Orchestra Volume 1. There's some Baby Snakes, which was kind of because there's a kind of a movie of Baby Snakes that he made, and that was the kind of mini soundtrack that pulls
the concert film, though, right?
Yeah, concert film and more madness stuff going on. Albums like The Man from Utopia, Some of which Them or Us, which kind of builds a little bit on You Are What You Is in that era, but perhaps isn't quite as strong.
From what I saw, a lot of the 80s seems to be dominated by archival live releases. There's you can't do this on stage anymore. Series,
yeah. And of course, there's You Can't Do It on Stage Anymore, all the way to Volume 6 or whatever, where he's putting together stuff from the live archives.
Is that dating all the way back to the 70s, or is it just new shows?
So Volume 1 goes all the way back. And then some of them are complete concerts. Some of them are, he's just picked stuff out. So
he was kind of archiving before he was even...
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah. Definitely archiving, producing some new stuff. The highlight for me out of all of that time, I mentioned it before, is Broadway the Hard Way, which is a big tour he did and is very political. Very, very, and it's one of those things, does it stand up because it name checks a lot of politics at its time. But I really, really, really like that. There's a lot of mess in the 80s, but I really think Broadway the Hard Way is a high point. Go on.
Sneaky Democrats.
Yeah, all of that. Yeah,
right.
yeah. and as a kind of sister to that album, because unfortunately, and it was around the time when no one quite knows when he was diagnosed with cancer, because he was quite private, but it feels like he knew that he was on his way out at that point. The band rebelled in that tour. You can look it up. There were some interpersonal things with the bass player, and they all fell out, and they went to Zappa saying, "You've got to sack the bassist," and Zappa refused. And they all basically stormed out, and then they tried to go back and go, "Oh, no, let's carry on," and he was just like, "No, forget it, not going." So there's also an album called "The Best Band You've Never Heard in Your Life," which is it kind of, because in the end, therefore, they didn't end up touring either Europe or the US. I can't remember which one. So, right. So we had to, I can't remember which one. So it was a live album. So it was a live album. What you kind of would have heard had he been able to carry on the tour, but he didn't, because the band folded. And at that point, you felt like he just couldn't be asked keeping a band together anymore, because he was dying.
And no one knew. And then he finally passed away in 91.
That is correct, yes.
So essentially, we only really have 25 years of music from him, and that has released, resulted in, like we say, 62 official albums, 67 unofficial, 129 in total.
Yeah.
So what I'm noticing, Dave, as during that, so first of all, Dave, thanks for that brief walkthrough. It's been really enlightening. What I'm noticing is there's a few different kind of themes. Obviously, there's the kind of fun commercial rock albums. Mm-hmm. There seems to be a kind of strain of comedy albums, perhaps, live albums, and obviously the guitar albums and the classical albums really, really stand out. So, for the benefit of our listeners, would you be able to pick out, say, 5 albums that are quite representative of the different strains of Zappa?
Yes, very difficult to do, because every era and every type you go, there's brilliant stuff missing out here. But if you were to force me, in the kind of first 4 or 5 years, early 60s stuff, my favourite is Absolutely Free. Okay? I think it's an absolutely brilliant, holds together. There's some really funny stuff on it. There's some really good music on it. It's the one I go to of that period. So
interesting, because I thought Conventional Wisdom is the first one or the third one.
Probably, but there you go. That's me. I think it's probably the most accessible of those, though.
Okay.
Probably. So, it would be hard not to say that if you're going to try and get into Zappa, you shouldn't listen to Hot Rats.
We haven't talked about Hot Rats. I do remember a famous Zappa quote, which was something along the lines of, "If you're from the UK, it's the only good Zappa album." Or I presume that, he got a bad time from the UK press, but for some reason this one's clearly been heralded as a bit of a classic.
Yeah, the press.
What is it about this record that's really endured?
It's other than,
and is it as emblematic of his talents as people seem to make out?
It's other than a little bit of singing by Captain Beefheart on Willie the Pimp. It's all instrumental, and I guess it's a pretty perfect fusion of Zappa, of what he's really capable of, which is musical complexity. Again, as we said, if you really want complexity, there's other places you can go, but in rock, musical complexity, lots of different instrumentation, and it's really hooky as well. Like he can write a hook, and Hot Rats itself, there's just it's a very appealing. It's that perfect mix of, original and good.
From what I recall, there's kind of 2 or 3 very short but very arranged kind of quasi-classical pieces, which sound very, very complicated, very Zappa-y, but at the same time are very hummable, which is a very sweet spot. And then there's 2 or 3 long guitar wig-outs, which oddly seem to possibly contain his best playing, because again, it's quite out there, but it's also quite melodic in a way. I'm not sure his later guitar work is, but we'll come on to that. So it'd be hard not to say, don't do Hot Rats. Arguably, then, if you've done Hot Rats, you don't need to do Wacka Jacka and the Grand Wazoo, although they are a little bit more funky and kind of jazz fusion. But arguably, who likes jazz fusion?
Who likes jazz fusion? If we're trying to pull out highlights, that will make anyone listen to this go rah. Of the early 70s or the 70s stuff.
Should we call this the Imperial era?
The Imperial era. I am really hard pushed to choose between, for me, Roxy and Elsewhere and Bongo Fury. I just find them, they're both brilliant. I would plump broadly to Roxy and elsewhere, but you could make an argument for one size fits all. Bombay Fury, they're all brilliant. The kind of late 70s. Well, so it's a cheat, but Lather, I know it's the 4 albums, but if you're looking for actually, if you want to buy one album or what Lather, that has everything in it of Zappa. So
confession, I did buy Lava at some point in my university days and just never got into it. It was just too impenetrable.
Okay.
So give our readers something. Most people are not going out to select a disc anymore because it's shut. So what should I stream? Short and easy.
Short and easy. Of that period, I would just about go You Are What You Is over Shady Booty. Although, and this might be the segue into the guitar stuff, I really love the guitar work on the end of Shady Booty, which is Yo Mama. There's a guitar thing there that I can listen to again and again and again.
Okay, so we've got a bit of 60s classic period. We've got a bit of the Imperial phase. We've got some, guitar wig out on Hot Rats.
But no, and then I think you've got to round it off with Broadway the Hard Way. I just think it's almost a career retrospective, and there are, melodies and he Magpie's music from his early stuff on Broadway the Hard Way. I just think it's a really brilliant, tight release of really good stuff. And it doesn't matter to me that the politics, the people he's name checking are, because he could be name checking anybody now. You could just insert different names.
Because times are darker now than they were then.
Yeah, times are darker now, and they're all, it's all about, fried chicken's on the take. And
that's an interesting fact. I'd love to hear Zappa
satire.
I would love to hear satire the state of the world today.
Yeah.
But Dave, there's one glaring absence from your Hot 5.
Mm-hmm.
There's no orchestral works.
No, it's not my bag, and I don't understand enough of it. And you can, I know he's now is more and more respected by contemporary classical world, and he's not just another rock guy trying to do classics. So some of his the Yellow Shark, some of his later stuff has been played at the places where they play proper classical music, even though he's not paid for it. He'd be very pleased about that. But it's not my stuff.
The fact it's being performed is not really a sign of validation in this day and age. I mean, most of the best orchestras are now performing live soundtracks along to the Jurassic Park and Planet Earth and whatever else.
Yeah.
And I surely it's just the people that were listening to Zappa in their teens and 20s are now going to concert halls and would probably rather hear the Yellow Shark than another Beethoven symphony. I'm not sure that is actually any indication of his growing acceptance by the establishment. How seriously do you think his work really has been taken?
I don't know. It's not my world. And you're right. Of course, it's always strictly commercial. The cost of putting a classical thing on is huge, and the fact that Zappa has a cachet may well help that. So we probably won't know.
Let me ask you another question.
No, I'm just going to say we probably won't know for 100 years, because that's how long the time. When that kind of fame thing is gone, is he still?
Yeah, I suspect that won't do well, just because much as it happens in all pop culture, will continue to return to the canon. But even contemporary composers of today might be performed in their lifetime, but very few of them will be played in 100 years. And just to hammer that point home, if you were on holiday to say Berlin, and you walk past the concert hall and they're performing another Beethoven symphony or even Stravinsky, you probably would buy a ticket. But if you suddenly saw they had a program with Zappa, you probably would.
Yeah.
So
fair enough.
So Dave, that's the Zappa releases you couldn't live without. As you've mentioned, 129 releases of counting. I'm sure there's dozens more in the archives to come. Mm-hmm. Is it all good? Surely you kind of maintained the quality across that number of releases in barely a quarter of a century. Does any of it suck?
I think some of it does. But for me, it's only some of the stuff in the 80s. So I would say, although, I think I could make a case for enjoying being, some of it's a challenge, like Lumpy Gravy is a challenge to listen to. but I appreciate
But it has value.
But it has value. I have tried very hard. There's no coincidence that kind of I did give up around release number 40, 45, because The Man from Utopia and Thing Fish and Ship Arriving Too Late to Save a Drowning Witch, they do feel lightweight. They do feel
Lightweight how?
Just kind of tossed off. I mean, and he, you know, everyone had a bad 80s, right? Who was classic in the same, you know, he was playing around with different production stuff, so it sounded very compressed and tinny, but it didn't, there wasn't the humour thing, which we'll come on to, but it felt really puerile, and I didn't feel like there was anything, and you know, God, given me done 45 albums or whatever, fair enough, but kind of musical ideas seem to not be there anymore. So
yet the 80s account for, you know, a good 40% of the time he was music making. I imagine actually probably overrepresented in the archives.
Sure.
Because that was the point where I think he had his own studio at home and was able to compose and create until his heart's content, and also using digital software, so he didn't need to rely on the band so much.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he spent the 80s. Well, he did those, what I think are very great albums. He then got into this whole Synclavia thing, you know, and for him that was, you know,
what's so Synclavia for?
It's some kind of electronic instrument that it's kind of like a synthesizer, but it allows you to produce pretty much any sound at that time. And remember, this is pre, you know, real, you know, computers being able to, you know, making music on your laptop kind of thing. I suppose it's a very, very early version of that. And I guess and it was, you know, so you sample and produce sounds and music and stuff from it. And for Zappa, it allowed him to not have to go through the filter of anybody else playing his music. He could play everything. But it's a bit, it's for me, I'm sure that it's just a little bit even more soulless. But he did, so there's, but there's Jazz from Hell, which he did all on the Synclavia. You know, and yeah, so the 80s on one level, he's very productive because he's doing the Synclavia realms, he's doing Man from Utopia and stuff, and he's doing a lot of retrospective releases through the, he can't do that on stage anymore, but with the exception of, Broadway the Hard Way, it's by far my least favourite decade of his.
I don't think that's a controversial
No, it's not.
choice. It does strike me, though, that he was maintaining that work rate, and it's a work rate that's weirdly being maintained posthumously with more albums released. In the quarter century he's been away than the quarter century that he existed. Is there any charge we can let the Zappa family for cashing in here? Because finding a dozen or 2 dozen albums lying around would be one thing, but
I can't answer that only because I've not listened to it. So, but but my first reaction would probably be, I don't think it's cashing in, because I know that Zappa had he archived everything, he recorded everything, he was like a hoarder of everything. So there are tapes everywhere. And you know, and a whole crowdfunding thing about trying to save the vault, because it's all, you know, some of it's on, you know, magnetic tape that's going to degrade, and trying to digitalize it. So
the Zappa estate needed more money.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but I don't think, you know, the 124th release, you know, official release on Zappa Records is exactly coining it in. I don't think they're, you know, getting $1 million a record.
And I know that his son, Dweezil has been quite active in keeping his father's oeuvre alive and continues to tour that music.
Yeah.
Did Zappa entrust these archives to anyone? Was there any kind of succession plan or any roadmap he laid out for this posthumous mega archive?
So originally, he just gave it all to his wife, Gail Zappa, and she managed it all. And then when she died...
What a lucky lady.
Well, yeah.
Not only being married to that,
Yeah. And,
but
you know,
shouldering that responsibility.
absolutely. And by all accounts, you know, she did it carefully. I mean, the re-releases were done, you know, carefully, and with respect. And I don't think there's been a massive backlash of kind of, oh my God, here's another Zappa album where you were just catching in, because I think there is so much good stuff.
That might also say more about Zappa's fan base than the quality of music.
Yeah, there is that too. Anyway, when she died, it went to a family trust of his children, which of course is Moon Unit, Dweezil, Ahmet and Diva. But they eventually did sell it to UMG in 2022.
Who are
Universal Music Group.
So are no doubt leading a very concerted campaign to rinse it dry.
So I guess at that point you could firmly throw the rinsing it dry stuff to the big evil. UMG plans to use the estate to engage fans and new audiences with merchandise, films, interactive experiences, and other projects. So yeah, they're going to Disneyize it, I guess. But you know, I guess the children.
Zappa theme park, here we come.
Do you know what? It's time to move on. Yeah.
So last of all, Dave, I know that Zappa famously posed the question: does humour belong in music? Now, I would suggest Zappa's oeuvre is conclusive proof that it should not. Because I think the greatest stumbling block or barrier I found to enjoying his work is that either it's not that funny to start with, or B, maybe it's pretty amusing, maybe it made me giggle, but I don't want to hear it over and over again.
Yeah.
So whilst we rewatch films and maybe our beloved sitcoms, you wouldn't ordinarily sit for a stand-up special repeatedly because you know the punchline before it's coming. Even when I do find Zappa amusing, the law of diminishing returns. And I think Broadway the Hard Way might be one of the few examples where I don't mind, because as you say, it's got some political commentary and it's maybe even kind of above musically and humour-wise. Convince me otherwise. So can you convince me that humour does indeed belong in music?
Yes, in that I don't mind that, because you do watch comedy films again, and you do watch and actually I do watch stand-up again, even though I know the punchline. What does that say about me? I don't know. And I know where I find Zappa funny, I'll laugh again. So I don't mind the repeats, but I don't see that any different to if you're emotionally, it's emotion, isn't it? So if you're emotionally affected by a piece of music, then go with it again. You know, it makes me laugh again. So I don't think it doesn't belong. I mean, you know, humour belongs, as Zappa said, humour belongs in life, so it belongs in music, because, you know, music reflects all of our emotions, does it not? Sadness, anger, happiness, comedy, tragedy. It belongs in the theatre. Belongs in. Why would music be one art form where humour doesn't belong?
Fair enough. I think that's a fair charge. The only defence I have is that I simply don't find it. I don't find it funny enough, and frankly, I quite often find it distasteful.
Yes, and that's the next question. Like, you know, does humour belong in music? Fine, but is it humour? And even if it is humour, well, is it? It's not funny and it's offensive instead. I think sometimes he thinks he's funny, and he is definitely, but isn't that true of everybody? And the offence thing, I have gone round in circles with, because when he's been challenged about it, he would say, so, you know, he says some pretty derogatory things about people's sexuality or people's behaviour around their sexuality. And I don't agree with him, just make this very clear. Now, what he would say is, like, you know, everyone's got their slaps to come. So, you know, like, I'm quite happy you can take the mick out of me.
As a privileged white rich rock star.
Yeah. Exactly. And therefore part of equality is that you should be able to take the mickey out of everybody as well. But I just think, you're hiding there. I think you've been, A, there's just the fundamental power imbalance, and B, there's you're not taking the mickey, you're being incredibly derogatory to groups of people who don't need it. And it's just offensive.
Yeah, that's my position entirely. I find that humour, with the exception of Broadway the Hard Way, I find the humour puerile at best, troubling and disquieting most of the time, and, you know, downright questionable at worst. I'm quite intrigued. As a parent, I know you're quite careful about the media your children consume. Would you advise your two young boys to get into Zappa today?
Musically, yes. I wish they would. But you're right. I wouldn't now. They're 12 and 13 at all. Or, I've played them whole rats, but that's, that's all instrumental. But I wouldn't play them some of the out there Zappa lyrically stuff for the same reason I don't show them James Bond. It's just that we're in very different times and we want them to grow up to be more respectful individuals than that. In time, though, yes, I would. And remember, we can say, oh God, Zappa, he was terrible and he said some awful, awful things. The last 20 years of, so 80s rock didn't exactly cover itself in glories, and 90s and noughties rap really didn't. Like, is it any more offensive as there's a question. Is it any more offensive than a lot of the stuff that's almost mainstream now?
I think the difference with Zappa is that it's not just a passing reference, a lyrical slur here and there. It's a kind of whole considered, quite lofty almost, the way he presents himself, with a whole worldview and a whole belief system.
Yeah.
So I do think maybe there's a difference to be made. I know that I'd be more comfortable listening to Zappa with certain tracks or lyrics removed. Do you think there is or could ever be a movement to re-edit or even censor his work? And frankly, could he ever be cancelled?
Well, it could be. Yeah, no, I can see it could be cancelled. I think the censoring is, I think you either cancel something or you don't. Once you start kind of editing, being blind to try and make it more palatable, just don't bother. Just don't. There's plenty of other art out there. Just don't do it. Just say, nah, it's horrible of its time. We're not going to have it anymore. Zappa himself would think that I have the right to not. So do you remember he had that whole? Do you remember the whole porn wars thing?
No.
So at some stage in the 80s, there was a big congressional hearing because Congress wanted to put the parental explicit labels on. And there was a hearing about whether it should be edited more and that the government should step in and censor this stuff because it was awful to children, etc. And Zappa went and gave evidence. And around the labels himself, a politician said, well, why would you object to the labels? And he was like, well, I shouldn't be relying on labels and other people's opinion for my children. I'll listen to it. And then I'll make a decision, and you should, as parents, no one should be relying on somebody else's view of what your kids could listen to. So the labels are just a complete non-starter. You should be a better parent than that. So I don't think Zappa would have a problem with me proactively editing. He would have a problem with me blindly following what the herd says is acceptable for my children, and that I sort of have some sympathy with.
And that's perhaps to me why his questionable opinions are so difficult to stomach, because he is clearly a very intelligent, very principled man.
Mm-hmm.
Last of all, though, he does seem to be a bit of a wretch. He does seem to have a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Do you think he was a deeply unhappy man? What was really driving him? Can you give us any insight into Zappa's psychology?
So he was very anti-drug. Drugs were absolutely banned on his set and with his back. You did not do drugs. He smoked some coffee, but very anti-drug. And if you look at, he met his wife 72, 3 or something. I've no doubt he did some rock and rolling before that, but he was happily married for the rest of his life and had 4 kids who, by all account, was a brilliant, caring father. And they're not, that cliche of the rock star's child going wild, etc. They're pretty, normal, decent people. So
despite their slightly peculiar name.
Yeah, exactly. So, and when if you read his autobiography and stuff he's written, he just comes across as someone that has a very strong worldview of himself, yes, but for him it really was all about music and his art, and he got up every day and he went to the studio and he did his work because he loved it, because it was the best, it was what made him the most happy, and then he saw his kids and went to bed. He wasn't and that's maybe why he that kind of whole, we talk about the emotion thing, a lot of rock and roll is about desperate, outward expression of often male, depression, angst and worry. That's why it's not there in Zappa, because he was doing what he loved. He just loved music. And so he did it all the time and it made him happy.
Well, I guess that's the one lesson we can take away from Zappa's music and his life. I'm just going to pause for a second to acknowledge, for anyone that's still listening, you're diehard enough to know that this is actually a bit of a moment. This is the first time me and Dave have recorded a podcast in the same room. It is quite literally a fireside chat. We've got you were in the recording, you might have heard a spitting fire. So I guess now's the time we have to acknowledge that we are long lost brothers, and that Zappa has been actually one of the things that potentially has, been a constant throughout our nascent relationship for sure. Do you want to start off by telling me how and when you discovered Zappa and what he's meant to you over the years?
Yeah, so I hated him at first. Shout out to my old friend Richard, who, when I was 16, started listening to Frank Zappa, and it was on in his house and stuff. I hated it. Couldn't get on with it at all. I mean, admittedly, I was listening to a steady diet of Yes, Genesis, and early U2 at the time. But I just couldn't, just thought, what is this noise? But eventually little hooks and melodies made their way into my mind, and I asked him to make a best of C90 tape, which he did, which I found myself playing more and more. And I slowly became a grudging Zappa fan, where I realised, I actually was just always picking that CD off the shelf because that's what I wanted. I think the first album I bought was You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore, Volume 1, and I gave that heavy rotation on the CD. And it grew and grew from there until, as I say, I did the chronology 1 to 40 quite, a few years ago.
And I would say, so prior to embarking on this epic journey through his oeuvre and later in life and reassessing it all, how many albums were you au fait with? Originally in your kind of 20s?
Yeah, so in my 20s, I guess the Zappa I had was more the late 70s, the Shade Beauty, You Are What You Is period, and a couple of the early 70s ones. I hadn't, before I started the whole journey, done any of this.
Oh, really?
Done any of the other stuff. And I tell you what's funny though is what he meant to me is kind of emotionally very little. That's when we talked about music before, it's often been in kind of like, well, where it's been for me in the worst time or best time or whatever. And Zappa is I've listened to a lot, but it isn't an emotional experience. It's a watching a clever movie experience rather than watching a tearing at my heartstrings experience. And I guess that's what you sometimes need. So that's okay. We've shared WhatsApps about, should I buy this album? And I've been able to go, well, this is this period and da. That's been great. But I don't, that's a really odd thing, isn't it? He's kind of top 5 artists, but top in terms of if I'm trying to enhance a mood of any type, way, shape, form, bottom 100. Yeah.
Well, music doesn't have to do just one thing.
No. So what about you? Where are you with Zappa now?
Well, Dave, so one of the reasons that I was so eager to, on this visit to your quaint waterside town, so eager to tie you to a chair and quiz you on Zappa, was because I think you're at least 50%, if not more, to blame for this kind of Marmite relationship I've had with him this whole time. So on the fateful meeting, when I was 16 and you were a lot older, we referred to our intro. It's well remembered and documented that we discovered a mutual love of the artist Neil Young. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty convinced, or certainly my brain has, structured this way. There's the same meeting. You said the only artist you enjoyed as much was Frank Zappa, and I knew nothing about. I believe at the same time I was staying with our mutual sister, who's part of the time, was also heavily into Zappa. So the two of you, chewing my ears off about this guy, meant a great deal to me. And I think soon after I would have bought the compilation Strictly Commercial. Right. And on a subsequent visit to London, said former partner presented me with a stack of 10 CDRs, which I presume were their favourite 10 albums. Wow. And it was quite an idiosyncratic mix. It definitely included one You Can't Do That on Stage was one. I think there's one guitar album. There was definitely at least one Mother's album, and probably a bunch of 70s stuff. I'm not even sure I got through them all. Okay. And I've no doubt I then probably burnt some of your Zappa collection later and bought some of my own. I continued to delve into Zappa throughout my late teens and early 20s. Mm-hmm. And I guess at some point I just stopped listening. I got a bit bored and sick of it. It's only the last kind of half decade where I've really had the time and resources to invest in vinyl, and knowing how good 70s vinyl typically sounds, I've started stocking up and revisiting this music. And that's why I've been A, haranguing you on WhatsApp, and B, so alternatively delighted and frustrated by what I found.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of it is as good as I remember it, and some of it certainly isn't. But this has only given me some food for thought about where to go next. So thanks for sharing your insights, Dave. And I guess we need to thank everyone for listening.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Till next time.